Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second panel of the day. We're going to be talking about negotiation empowerment. It's a pretty rich topic, and I think it's a complex one for the time we're in. But before we dive in, I want to introduce our panel or have them introduce themselves. I'm Laura, your host. Nick, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I'm Nick Fletcher. I'm the founder of Lucid Creative and now Ignition Enterprises, and I've been working in the live event industry for about 12 years, doing mostly screens producing and now a lot of general production design and producing. So.
Excellent. Rod, to you.
Hey there, I'm Rod McLaughlin, pushing 40 years of doing this and now into doing screens producing, but primarily what I like to do are odd projects. So weird pixel mapping, just strange projects that people come up with and integrating various technologies to do that.
Excellent. And Ben?
Ben Nicholson, and I'm currently teaching at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio in the Emerging Technologies and Business and Design school, and I teach creating visuals for music, and I teach animation, Notch, Touch Designer, After Effects. And from before that, I was doing creative producing for about 15 years with all sorts of different shows and companies, and with a lot of y'all out there in the audience as well as present company. So.
Excellent. I'm going to look at my notes because I find this topic, we can go a lot of different directions with this, but I think what I really wanted to capture in discussing are negotiation practices relative to right now, because I think it's very important. Negotiating projects right now, we're all, looking for work, worried about work for the future, what the shape of our work is going to be. And I think the real risk in trying to capture any available work is that we end up undervaluing our time. Rod, as you're saying, you're pushing 40 years in this industry. You know what the parameters are for, setting up a good contract for yourself. But I think, at some point, as our resources or our savings start to dwindle, we're going to compromise in places that maybe we haven't had to in a long time where we are in our careers. So I want to talk about that feeling of possibly being faced with, the desire to underbid compared to how we would in the past. And we're also bidding for projects that we don't have a lot of institutional knowledge in what we're doing. We're charting new courses in live production, whether it's virtual or XR stages. So our awareness of time and cost and team size to accomplish these tasks, this is evolving knowledge. So building out a contract for a large team, there's going to be some hit and miss with that as well. So I want to think about where we are now, and I want to maybe start with what we come from and really talk about what our strategies have been in the past for negotiating a project.
Yeah, I mean, this is a a subject of passion for me, for sure, because early on, or a while ago, I guess, I realized that the value I put on my time is a good base, but then understanding the value of the product that I'm delivering to my client is where I start in the negotiation. And if I don't understand the value that I'm bringing to the project, that's the first step in the negotiation for me. So asking questions and really doing my research and getting that information out of my client to understand why they value what I'm bringing, that sets the stage for the rest. And there's a minimum, but I try to not set a maximum, because that may be defined much higher in terms of pricing specifically than I ever imagined, and you don't know that until you get that from the other side. So that's where I start, is understanding where they're coming from and really listening.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that the number one thing is understanding the value that you bring, and certainly convincing your clients that you bring a lot of value to that. Just shy of magic, as long as you are slightly continue to be a bit of the magician, then they understand that value. I did want to add to that, though, that I think having the comfort level of making sure that your client understands that the team you bring with you is incredibly high value as well is very important. Making sure that all of those people that you work with are part of that negotiation and that understanding of value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the maybe a frame of reference, and again, this could just be my opinion of where I've come from, but as an individual who's had to assess my rate, meaning my day rate, hourly rate, or whatever that is, and then moving into business, running a division, and then business owner, I think the most important thing that I learned along that road is that this is really a thing that's based on a gig economy, whether it's same as VFX or motion graphics and things like that. So there is kind of this invisible or felt floor of knowing like what an hour or day rate is for a really good animator, or a day rate for a really good lighting designer or a programmer. And when you understand that there's this invisible kind of basically on your P&L statement, an expense line, which is really the labor cost, right? And then you begin to understand how that you specialize that in terms of either artistic, as Nick said, or technical skill. It starts to create that margin out of that invisible floor of how specific and how good you can actually make that force, either with yourself or with the people working with or under you. So the market can be felt, I think, is that what the minimum bottom line is in terms of like where that margin. But it does have to do with an understanding, I think, of rates at the end of the day.
So let's talk a little bit about that client conversation when you're trying to understand the parameters of a gig, and outlining team and costs and expectations. How do you then handle, say, the "oh, by the way" feeling of like maybe the client wasn't able to clarify some aspect of the project that's actually very expensive? What do you do with the curveballs after a contract is being negotiated or has been negotiated or in the process of being negotiated?
Yeah, scope creep. It's a killer, and I can't sit here and say that there's any silver bullet to it. And I think this would go across, kind of across all of these conversations, is having my most successful client relationships are the ones that I'm most honest with and feel that I can be the most honest with, and extremely frank, and be like, even if we're negotiating a new deal, or if it's the first time I'm interacting with them, be like, hey, it feels like I'm getting screwed here. Is that your intention? Like, just put it out there and just be like, was that what you wanted to do? Because that's how I feel right now. And like, it's a very emotional thing, actually. And then that sets the groundwork for a later conversation that can be, hey, we never talked about that. Like, what are you talking about? So I could sit here and say, define scope of work perfectly every single time, but that's not how the real world works. And I think that we all know that. So I'm interested in actually hearing what the other panelists do, because it's a hard issue. Like,
I definitely think it comes back to one of the things that we as a panel discussed earlier offline, was this idea of not being afraid of contracts, of getting used to contracts, letter of agreement, anything very early on, not being afraid of those, understanding that they simply reduce misunderstandings and they're therefore beneficial for everyone. So one of the things that we like to do with custom software projects is try and be specific about the scope of work, but at the same time immediately put in there the idea that yes, there are going to be changes. We expect changes. We want to be flexible. And let's just put in a mechanism for how we all handle that.
Yeah, I think the point of familiarity and the point of learning I had was the value of my relationship with the production managers. And in many cases, not all cases, those are the ones that hold the keys, and they're the ones setting up the presumption at the beginning of a gig, right? And saying this is the scope, it's X dollars, and your sliver is this much. And I think in the healthy relationship with a production manager, you can say, do you want me to scope my work very specifically, because it gives them a tool to keep the artist or the client in line with their set of expectations. Sometimes they don't want that. I mean, sometimes they want to know that somebody's going to say something to you and you'll just get it done. And you have an understanding with them that, I've got a bucket that's this big and I'm just going to roll with it until the bucket goes empty, and you and I will have a conversation and they'll sort it out.
Yeah,
It isn't it. Go ahead, Nick.
Building on what you were saying is that, like, as much specificity in the contract as absolutely possible it takes care of as many what ifs, right? Just like we take care of technical what ifs in the system design, you take care of business what ifs in the contract. And I think contracts are scary to a lot of people, and I would like to do anything I can to demystify them because they don't have to be.
Yeah, that would be one thing in terms of people trying to learn the business, or even just get better, is just I try to say in some of my classes we talk about this, is that a contract is a conversation. And if that's not the way it's being dealt with, that's really hard on both ends. Meaning, and then there are some that you just won't be able to have a conversation. It's not that type of contract. But in the best scenarios, it's the setup of the job, and you can cross things out and go back and forth a little bit and get to a place where you feel comfortable.
I think it also helps just to define for both you and your client what exactly you expect to do. So by being able to put that in words, go, hey, I'm just trying to understand what exactly are we trying to achieve here. And then also a point I wanted to throw out there was to Ben's point, is I think it does differ across industries, obviously, in terms of the comfort level from the production manager. So just being aware of that and approaching that appropriately.
It is also amazing what production managers think a screens producer does, or even an artist, right? And so that's like, you'll presume like, oh, they understand what I do, and then all of a sudden,
you'll say, hey, buy this book from a friend of mine.
Right. I can remember one conversation that was like, oh, you're screens producer? Yeah, I'll run the content and I'll get all the stuff, and you're going to run the D3 too, right? Back in D3 at Disguise, I was like, no, I'm not operating, and then basically he stopped calling me after that because all he really wanted was a Disguise operator.
I love the disdain that you got on your face when you said operating D3, though. That was impressive.
No, it's the absurdity that anybody out there who knows me, that I would actually be allowed to touch. There are some people that don't allow me to touch keyboards on gigs. I'll let them laugh in their own.
Then we can talk about your actual skills another time. I do want to capture one thing that's really important to me, which is client education, because I feel like part of that contract negotiation, and we're talking about trust and these long-term relationships, when you build that up, one of the things I try and do every time I iterate a show or a contract is take those moments of opportunity to engage with the people that hire me, so that when they're looking at a line item that they inherited on a spreadsheet that has no meaning for them, give it meaning, so that that line item becomes value. Or maybe I can add another line below it because I need a new person as that job is becoming more complex. So that dialogue and client education that comes from that, I think, translates into a better negotiation process, because you're enlightening your partner in this conversation into why these roles are valuable, why they take time, and why they cost money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the key word that you just said there is partner, and like the most the most successful relationships I have in the business period, whether it's a client or a colleague or whatever, I consider partners. And that's all I'm focused on doing right now, is building more and stronger partnerships as a sign of strength, and not as kind of the old way of thinking, in a way that I've been subject to a lot, which is, no, you work for me, and you and these other people work for me, and I get all the money and you do all the work, right? And your value is primarily that you get the joy of working on this gig with me, and not, not that we're a team delivering this amazing thing. So that's what I'm interested in building, essentially.
I think as part of that, you're trying to avoid is trying to build that long-term relationship, trying to avoid being that person in a black shirt sitting backstage all the time, engaging with your producer, and once again making sure that your producer understands who else is there with you. Make sure that they meet those people, so they understand these are awesome people as well, and they have these amazing skill sets. It's I think it's really crucial in terms of building that long-term relationship.
It's a great point. That's be visible,
So let's refocus that to right now. I assume some of you are talking to your client partners that know and trust you, but possibly they're new clients calling for virtual events, and so we're working in this new environment and trying to price out, build teams and contract structures for doing this new work. How is that going for people?
Well, it's kind of the Wild West, to be honest. The new tech feels like a lot of new tech, right? It feels like the beginning of projection mapping. It feels like the beginning of media servers in general. Is like it's constant education, but it's all, so the new shiny toy everybody's really excited about gives you license to kind of define your own story around it. It's also very risky from their point of view. So that it's just constant education and trust building and relationship building, and so yeah, it's going all kinds of different ways, and it's all based on the personalities involved, honestly. Like that's the skills that I'm leveraging more now than anything technical or anything else, is just so much talking. We're just talking and talking and talking and talking about it, and getting people comfortable and letting them go away and letting them come back and ask questions, and and being exceedingly patient with that process, because our brains are so far ahead in like what's possible, and they're just trying to understand that a camera can be tracked in 3D space.
So are you saying clients are going away because of cost or complexity, or because they're not able to clearly explain what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I don't think they know what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
For the most part right now.
It sounds like sometimes they're just saying words like virtual. Like, okay, what do you really want to do? Do you want to have a Zoom meeting, or do you want to like make a giant video game? That's hard. That's helping them articulate seems to be the task.
But at the same time, I think that's part of that is particularly with new clients, that's some of the benefit is that at this point, gaining that trust, having that conversation is how you build that initial relationship. So once again, putting yourself forward as that person who brings that value to the conversation and does speak that language, but at the same time speaks the old language and therefore can do the translation for them. I think it helps build those relationships very quickly.
Yeah, right. And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that inherent in that uncertainty is a huge opportunity to deliver a product instead of a quote unquote known service that they think, right? One struggle is that we're constantly trying to explain what a screens producer does. That's a known problem, right? Now we have the opportunity to say, I'm just going to do this thing for you, right? This big magic thing, and this is going to be the result of that. And let's talk about the budget, right? Let's talk about what position you're in, how much you can, what the appetite of your client is. And if you can get into that conversation, then you're good to go. I think there's a lot of frustration from technical people that people above the line don't understand what they do, and the dissolving that line is what I'm really interested in, is connecting people who make decisions in management and making them partners of the people who actually execute that thing. And instead of just line items on a spreadsheet, they're actual people, and they have really good ideas, and they bring a lot to the project. So let's all talk about this as a team and talk about the final product, right? What is the audience experience going to be? And what is the value of that? And if we can keep our negotiation in that space, then we stop talking about how many hours we're going to put in, and how we can stop talking about, the quote unquote, right, the costs, right? If we can talk about value instead of costs, then we're winning. And I know I'm going south in a negotiation when they're just like, nah, it's not going to take that long. That's when you've lost.
So I think one of the tricks there is that we, in the community, slightly define our roles a little bit differently from each other. We're not instantly swappable, and so each negotiation is also an explanation of how we approach this work. So how do we rely on each other in the community to improve our practice as negotiators, as a group, so that we can be clearer with our clients about what we're bringing to a project?
Rod,
Ben, thoughts on that?
Oh, great.
I've started every question.
No, I want to hear Ben's take on this.
I mean, there are some things that have becoming standardized. I think there are some things that are not. I mean, I think the main tool that I've had is the communication. Kind of what this forum really represents is it's a loose affiliation of either really good friends or acquaintances or people that you bumped into, and I don't know how you formalize how a crew really runs, because so many jobs are so unique. I think it's also knowing that, again, back to production managers, is that they want to crew things the way they want to crew them. And sometimes you're part of the lighting team, sometimes you're a part of, creative team, sometimes you're a part of your own content team. And so I think I don't have an easy answer about that in terms of can we make it clearer? But I do know that it feels like it's coalescing better. It feels like it's kind of getting it's a rhythm. There feels like there's more of a rhythm. I mean, when we started this 15-ish years ago, you had to beg to get chairs, from production, or they didn't understand that you actually needed power to run your computers. and at least I think that's starting to be solved. I hope it is, and I think there's a respect and a position that is starting to become more regular. But I don't know how you formalize all of it down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention that a charter of ethics and best practices and stuff has been discussed a lot. I think some kind of loose description with job titles would help that immensely, or a correlation of job titles, between verticals, because that's the main challenge, right? Is people coming from backgrounds other verticals coming into a new one and not correlating things correctly, or it's a mess, right? We all know it's a mess, and not just in screens producing, right? It's now we're not just talking about bringing video into a primarily lighting driven world. We're talking about integrating entire video game pipelines into a live production, like there's, and the challenges of live, and this is only going to accelerate. So we need to, as a community, come together and make a mechanism for really understanding like any given pipeline. And I think there are some generic kind of terms of management structures to implementers that could be a rough structure. Just spitballing, but I think there are more commonalities and there are more variety in the words than there are in the actual roles. So
I think there's also kind of the tension I think that's felt, I know I felt it, is you're trying to expand your business and your goods and services, right? I mean, that's a natural thing. And so you generally, well, as you're going vertically, there's also the horizontal growth. And so you're adding capability onto your team. There's some people who want to be in charge of the whole production. There are some people that want to be the creative director, and so they're moving vertically within these teams and these shows. And so that competition, I think it's hard for that to not work against standardization, because they want, if you're going with a big company that can do all the creative services, all the technical, all the video, all those things, that's inherently, they're going to put their own ecosystem over it. And I think that's something that I think just has to be, I think, acknowledged, but also knowing that I think the way through that is probably relationship at some point, is trying to understand that you're not totally trying to box everybody out of everything all the time.
I'm going to shift this slightly for our last couple of minutes here, and just, there are a lot of complexities we're talking about getting these contracts right, but, how do you decide a job that you're negotiating is right for you and your team? Do you have like a list of parameters you're trying to meet, like your own type of smell test to make sure a gig feels right for you? Rod, let's start with you.
I think fun factor is number one, because to a large degree, rates are relatively standardized to an extent. So the idea of who you can bring on, if you can bring on your usual team, and therefore you're going to have a good time. The producer is somebody you've worked with before. The project itself sounds interesting. We've all done horrible projects that were still a lot of fun, just because of the people that were there. So I think that it always has to be the number one thing, is who are the other people that are involved.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, it's all about relationships, and I wanted to tie it all together a little bit. Is that a contract isn't scary because all it is a representation of a relationship, and if they're not willing to, represent that relationship on paper, then it's probably not equitable, or someone's lying, right? So that's my primary sniff test now, is whether we're on the same page on paper as well as verbally.
I think for me, I used to keep a sheet in front of me and at my desk, and it was one, is it economically viable? Two, is it going to build my portfolio? Does it have innovation involved, and does it have good people? And it had to have like 2 or 3 of those for me to really feel good about the job going forward, or one of them had to be an overwhelming factor, right? To Rod's point, if it's got good people, I might take a risk, but
yeah.
that was my framework.
I think the people component, I mean, I think that's why gathering together like this and having this weekend together, it's just a reminder of that, is we are such a community, people, friend driven industry that a lot of us would sacrifice many other aspects of our compromise on contract points or whatever, because we want to support these teams of family, chosen family we've created. So I think it just makes it all that much more complex.
Yes.
Any final thoughts before we throw to break?
Just one last thing very quickly about the previous question, was that idea of community is not being afraid to bring in people that are considered your peers. Sometimes we hire below us, we hire within a realm, but looking at who else is out there, who you admire, not being afraid to hire those people as well. I think you gain access to a phenomenal amount of knowledge that way.
Yeah. Same exact
Excellent.
thing, right? Partnerships are strength, not weakness.
So we'll all pitch a job together, yeah?
Hell
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's go.
Again.
Thank you guys for your time. I hope this is insightful for other people. Contracts can be a struggle, but they don't have to be. And I think as we build this community, we can rely on each other for insight, especially as we're carving a new type of contract for these virtual gigs. We should be relying on each other. So with that, we're going to take a break here at Framework. 15 minutes past the hour, we'll start up again with our third session. We'll see you guys in a little bit. Thank you.